Hey everybody, it's Tom Duff with Mental Health Matters, the podcast from St. Louis Counseling. Check our services out at stlouiscounseling.org. And this podcast, right, we want to break down stigma. We want to make mental health okay to talk about around the dinner table, and ultimately that we all recognize that we all have mental health just like we all have physical health. So, sometimes I feel like a mental health nerd, right? Because there are certain aspects that gets me excited, that comes to the forefront, all right, that comes to attention. And one of the things that came out in December was the Surgeon General of the United States, Surgeon General Murthy, put out an advisory addressing the mental health crisis for youth. And so sad, right, that there has to be an advisory about that. Sad that I got excited about that, but ultimately it's a really good thing, right? And that's what makes me excited, because we're recognizing that youth mental health is really, really vital, right? So if you care at all about the next generation, about youth mental health in general, maybe you have kids, grandkids, or you're just concerned about the next generation, I think you need to check out this advisory. You can actually find it at our website, stlouiscounseling.org. It's up there on the front page right now. And it's really important that you take some time to read it. It's an easy read, but I want to talk a little bit about that today. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper. Because one, St. Louis Counseling, it's important to us, right? This whole podcast, even that we do, we're wanting to break down stigma. We're wanting to educate people about mental health, and our services at St. Louis Counseling are all about helping kids as young as 3 all the way up to our seniors, right? So the advisory itself is focused on youth, but there's a lot of just transferable things to adult mental health as well too. But the Surgeon General made a comment in there. It's not just a medical obligation, but it's a moral obligation that we address youth mental health. So, he as a doctor, he finds it's an obligation that we need to address mental health. And myself as a licensed clinical social worker, I'm the same way. I need to do that. But the moral obligation, that's interesting, because that taps into like my world of a nonprofit, a faith-based nonprofit at that. I really do believe that, and we could get into philosophical ideas and components, and spiritual components and all that, but I believe we're put on this earth, right, to help others, right? I really do. That we can affect other people by our interactions and what we do. And, that's kind of a core kind of concept that I have. And I'm in this field for a reason, right? Because I believe that. I've been in this field over 20 years, for sure, but over 20 years. And it's about helping people change, right? And so it's helping people recognize some things about themselves, to take some steps moving forward. And I believe that it's a calling as well, too. You talk to any social worker, anybody in this field of mental health, I mean, it's a really tough job, and it's a tough job that doesn't have a lot of pay. There's not a lot of, huge attributes and huge celebrations when we make progress with stuff. So it's not like a sports team that wins a championship and you have a parade and everyone's behind them and they're made millions and millions of dollars. Our field isn't like that, right? We're in it for a reason. We're called to do that. So, when he said that moral obligation, that really kind of hit home with me as well too. So the other thing he said, it's a whole of society project, a whole of society effect that they're trying to do with this advisory to bring all this forth. And they were able to put it together with some core areas, some factors, some areas that should be focused on. I'm just going to read those real quick, right? I'm not going to go into every single one, but one, what can young people do? What family members can do and caregivers can do? What educators and school staff can do? What can health organizations and health providers do? Media organizations, entertainment companies, and journalists, what can they do to impact youth mental health? Social media, video gaming, and other technology companies. What can they do? What can community organizations do? What do funders and foundations do? How can they help youth mental first aid? Or not mental first aid, but youth mental health. If you're interested in youth mental first aid, go to our website, stlouiscounseling.org. What can employers do? What federal, state, local, tribal governments can do? And what additional research is needed. So those are the core concepts, right? And each one of those is one page of the advisory. And when I read through that, I've read through this a few times now since December, and I wanted to kind of bring this to the forefront and to kind of this level of talk about. There's a theme to all of this, right? And it's a theme of to destigmatize mental health, communication, breaking down the barrier, all right, or barriers to accessibility, and all systems are woven together. So you've heard me say time and time again, like mental health affects everything, right? So education, the economy, the criminal justice system, mental health is woven into everything. And they were able to show that by some of all those areas I just listed and how they can come together to effectively improve this crisis in youth mental health. So when you talk about when they're woven together, right, if you think of the concept of systematic racism, so, it's part of our systems and it's still prevalent, no matter if you think it isn't or not, it exists, right? And when one person, if you think about this, a person that's experiencing racism, whether it be maybe on the job, right? And they just can't move ahead because of their color. They can't take the next step. And they've seen time and time again, they're just as qualified and they can't move forward. That affects their mental health, right? So they may then having less self-confidence. They may start struggling with their interactions with their coworkers. Then all of a sudden, maybe they lose their job, right? So then all of a sudden they're having a hard time having the paycheck come in and making ends meet. That affects the relationship at home with loved ones. And then all of a sudden the self-esteem is not there, the self-confidence is not there, the difficulty and the trauma and those kind of pain points that they've endured over the years, they're all starting to come forward. It affects mood. It affects the level of toxic stress. And that toxic stress turns into symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of depression. That's how this all starts. So when we improve and make efforts into one part of a system of society, it can affect other aspects as well too. So I know as I go off on a tangent there, I got a little bit further away from youth crisis, but there's a couple things, and there'll be a couple other podcasts that come out that focus on certain areas of this and be some themes as we go. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out is what young people can do. And I want to just point out a couple of positive things that's either I've seen with my own eyes or things that I've heard about. So what can youth do, right? So one, you see locally here at some high schools, we even had somebody on from the Rockwood school district. Was a young man who was empowered by some of the school administration to begin a mental health committee that then all of a sudden connected into not just one high school, but the 4 high schools of Rockwood. And so what they did was bring the concept of mental health forward to talk about, to have an open avenue. It's scary right now for youth. They've seen friends commit suicide, make suicide attempts, make comments about suicide, have suicidal ideations. They see that, they hear that, they feel that, they don't know what's going to happen. So, we see young people coming forward, making the concept of a committee to figure out how they can address that problem. So it's taking charge. So young people can take charge and take initiative. Huge component of that. Youth that are part of kind of peer-to-peer supports that have been trained in mental health first aid to know what to look for, know what to say if they have a friend come forward. We've seen that within our communities, which is highly important because then you're being trained to be able to see different aspects of an individual. They're not just a strange kid, they're not just a weirdo, and there's things that maybe that individual is struggling with. And so proactively, youth can reach out, or youth realize, hey, it's not cool to go ahead and bully that person. It's not cool to go ahead and make that comment inside of the classroom. Or you have that culture then that that kid doesn't feel like saying that because the culture is, let's protect those that seem vulnerable to us. So there's these proactive things that youth can do. Not to mention, and there's some stuff inside of the advisory as well. But I think the more we as parents and we as educators help our students realize they have a voice, the more they realize their say matters. And sometimes, we as parents, we as administrators may hear lots of ideas, right? But we just can't shoot those ideas down because it's coming from a young person. Right? It's worth to listen, it's worth the time, and it's worth to see if there's at least one aspect of their ideas that matters, because that goes a humongously long way. That's right, I said humongously, right? That's my new word of the day. It is Friday, I can say what I want coming back from a snow day, so I'm good. So the bottom line is this, when we are trying to help youth, right, let's then help empower them. Right? Let's help them take some charge. I'm also a proponent of mental health being taught in schools, right? And it is, right? I know it is. There's health classes that have part of a chapter, right? That has, so you might spend maybe a week on it. But that's it usually. So I'm a proponent that maybe that's extended a little bit, and maybe it's taught at a younger age. And we see that from our therapists that are inside of schools. They're helping with social, emotional goals, emotional regulation, but it's also helping others, kids who may not struggle with it at all, recognize that we all have this emotional health issue. And that kid over there may be struggling right now, but it doesn't mean that you won't, right? And so you'll often hear me say, I think the data with youth is 1 out of 5 have a mental health condition, right? And sometimes we see 1 out of 4 as well, adults that have a diagnosable mental health condition. So if it's 1 out of 4, what about those other 3 people? Well, they all have a component of mental health, and we have to remember that. So I think the younger we have that into our youth and our kids' brains, that we all have, just as we get a yearly checkup for an annual physical, a well check, whatever it may be, before we play any sport, we have to do our physical health checkup. There's a component that we need to have those check-ins as well too with our health, and that's stuff parents can do with their kids as well too. So I encourage you guys to look at this advisory, right? To do some thinking and reflecting about it. And as I said, when I talked, the one sentence he had, it's not just a medical obligation, it's a moral obligation. Give yourself a little time to think about that. Like, is it a moral obligation to you that we try to take care of our youth mental health? And think about that. Challenge yourself, because I'm the big guy too with know thyself, emotional intelligence. The more time you spend getting to know yourself, the better human being you are. So I think that's all I have today with this Surgeon General advisory. It's worth to read, because I think we all need to be invested in our kids' futures, and be on the lookout for some other podcasts that relate to this mental health advisory. And as always, if you're curious about our services, check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. We have some amazing therapists that are just so dedicated to the clients and the change they're creating. I just can't speak even more proud of than I am. So anyway, until next time, this is Tom Duff, St. Louis Counseling. And remember, mental health matters.